The year 1914. A small island where there is no city, no crowd of people. There is only a lighthouse. And a mystery hidden in the depths of the ocean. The film begins by showing a ship heading towards its destination through the South Atlantic Ocean. On that ship was a weather officer named David. They were heading towards an island hidden in the deepest parts of the Atlantic Ocean. The government had sent David to that mysterious island to closely observe the changing weather there. David was supposed to stay there for about 1 year, to collect data, to understand the strange weather changes, and then return. The captain was taking David to that island on his ship, along with a year's worth of food and all necessary supplies. After a long journey, they finally reached the island. They disembarked onto the island with the help of a boat. They also brought their necessary belongings. There was a lighthouse on the island and a small house where David was to stay, because a weather officer used to live here before. But now his duty time was over. From today, David became the new weather officer of this island, and the former officer, Robert, was about to return home on Captain Axel's ship. But when they went to the house, they were shocked. There was no sign of any person. The furniture inside the room was scattered. Everything was in disarray. Maybe someone could be in the lighthouse. Captain and David, without wasting time, moved towards the lighthouse and see a strange sight there. The entire lighthouse was surrounded by sharp and pointed wooden stakes, as if someone had deliberately closed it off so that no one could enter. Captain and David knocked on the lighthouse gate several times, but there was no response. In the end, they pushed the gate hard and went inside. At the very top of the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner. He was lying down. When they asked Gruner about the old weather officer, he casually said he died of some terrible disease. But when the captain asked him about the dead body, his answer was even more mysterious. Maybe someone killed him. Hearing Gruner's words, both David and the captain were shocked. They thought maybe Gruner's mental condition was not right, but until they find the old officer, they can't do anything. The captain told David, "If you still want, you can come back with us." But David knew that if he could provide the government with an accurate weather report of this island, he could earn a lot of money, and he needed money anyway. That's why he decided to stay here. The captain gave him a gun for protection. Maybe this place is not as safe as it looks. After the captain left, David settled the house a bit, made it livable. In a drawer of the room, he found a diary belonging to the old officer. That officer had set foot on this island in 1913. The diary had a lot written about the island, but not everything was clear. Some things were incomplete. David read every line carefully. There were also sketches of some strange kinds of animals in the diary. David did not understand why he had made such pictures. Maybe he was alone and did it to pass the time. On one page of the diary, there was also a photo of his wife. David got tired of reading the diary and slowly fell asleep. The next morning, David started his work. But as soon as he reached near the sea, he stopped. Some stones were arranged in a strange way among the rocks, and some seashells were placed in a peculiar pattern among them. David thought maybe Gruner did all this. Thinking this, he got back to his work, collecting weather data. The very task he had come here for. During work, when he looked towards the lighthouse with binoculars, he saw another person with Gruner. But then, he thought it might be his imagination. It was night, and David was busy with his work. Just then, there was a knock on the door. He thought, maybe it was Gruner. David called out his name, but there was no response. As David moved forward with a lamp in hand, strange sounds began to echo in his ears. And then, he saw a bizarre creature's hand trying to come in from under the gate. The hand was not human. David's heart filled with terror. He immediately ran towards the basement and hid there. In no time, the mysterious creature had entered the house. It was stealthily searching for David. From a small crack in the basement, the creature's terrifying eyes started staring at David. David picked up a knife, and as soon as those eyes came in front of the crack, he thrust the knife with all his strength. The creature screamed and ran away, but it could come back at any time. David firmly closed the basement gate, tied it tightly with a rope, and spent the whole night awake there, under the shadow of fear. The next morning, when David went outside the house, he saw some marks on the sand. The footprints were not like those of a human. It was absolutely clear. This was not the work of a human. The footprints ended directly towards the sea. Now David understood everything. Why had Gruner placed sharp wooden stakes around the lighthouse? Maybe for that strange creature. And now David knew this house is not safe for him at all. Maybe that creature will return again tonight. Scared, David runs towards the lighthouse. He shouts to Gruner, "Open the gate, I need to come inside." But Gruner does not let him in and says you should have returned with that ship. David returns disappointed, but now he has to make his home safe. He boarded up every window with wood. He made a barrier with sharp sticks all around and placed old papers and books outside the gate. Then he sprinkled oil on them so that if the creature returned, it could be scared away with fire. But there was one thing David still didn't know, and he was going to find out about it tonight. Fortunately, he found an old box inside the house. In that box, there was a gun and many bullets. Seeing this gave him a little courage, but the fear was still alive. As the sun began to set, the darkness of night spread everywhere. David sat quietly in a corner of the house with a gun in his hand. His breathing was rapid. Just then, a strange sound was heard, and when David stepped towards the window, it was as if the ground slipped from under his feet. Not just one, but many of those bizarre creatures appeared rising from the water. And all were moving towards his house. In just a short while, they started trying to break the gate. David immediately started firing bullets. Some creatures fell, but the rest became even more violent. They were now trying to get inside the house. As their numbers began to increase, David, without wasting time, set fire to the papers and old books kept outside the gate. Seeing the fire, the creatures retreated back into the sea out of fear. But now the same fire had reached David's house. The house had caught fire, and since the entire house was made of wood, the fire spread like lightning. David immediately wrapped himself in a sheet to protect himself. He broke through the gate and hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse. His right hand was badly burned. Fortunately, it started raining at that moment. The fire slowly began to extinguish. But even after a whole night of rain, by morning, David couldn't save his house. The entire house was almost reduced to ashes. Now, if David wants to survive, he will have to take refuge in the lighthouse. He picked up his rifle and hid among the rocks near the lighthouse. When Gruner went outside the lighthouse to fetch water, David followed him. The intention was to take him at gunpoint and enter the lighthouse. But suddenly, when Gruner pointed a gun at him, a strange creature, which was near Gruner, attacked him. That creature was Gruner's protector. Gruner immediately stopped David and said, "This is my pet." David didn't shoot, but he set a condition. If he wanted to stay alive, he should be allowed to live in the lighthouse. He had enough gunpowder for a year and enough food for both to survive. Gruner was silent for a while, then slowly agreed. Before evening, they both returned to the lighthouse with the remaining food. The next morning, the creature was quietly tending to David's hand while David was in a deep sleep. And in just a short time, his hand was quite healed. It was all a shock for David, but it was hard to believe what was happening before his eyes. At the top of the lighthouse, David saw Gruner counting the bullets they got from the gun, and that creature was helping Gruner in its own way. This meant that the animal was not violent. David now wanted to learn more about it from Gruner and then bring all this to the world. Because it was nothing short of a miracle, a strange female creature emerged from the deep darkness of the sea before them. If the truth about this creature came out to the world, both David and Gruner would become famous worldwide. But Gruner did not want any of this. He did not want to go anywhere from this island. Gruner had no one of his own. According to him, no one can live alone in society. Everyone has to live as someone's slave or servant. That's why this island was perfect for him. This place where he considered himself a king, master of his own will. That's why he had written in many parts of the island, "Gruner is king." But how did that strange female creature become his pet? Actually, once Gruner saved her life. She accidentally got caught in his fishing net. At that time, the creature was small, and since that day, she stayed with Gruner. Started obeying his every word. But Gruner was an angry person and never behaved humanely with that creature. He maintained regular physical relations with her. Once, that creature even attacked Gruner, and in return, Gruner punished her. A punishment after which that creature began to consider herself Gruner's servant. Perhaps this is why every night those creatures come out of the sea to take her back. But those creatures cannot attack in daylight. Well, David no longer wants to stay here. He wants to signal an incoming ship and leave this place. But this task was not so easy. Gruner said that no ship comes to this island, but David does not believe him. He does not like it here at all anymore. He was feeling suffocated and wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. It's getting evening. Gruner tells him to get ready with the gun because the creatures can attack at any time. They get ready to turn on the lighthouse light, and soon a large number of creatures emerge from the sea. They keep advancing towards the lighthouse. Gruner keeps firing at them continuously. But David was completely scared. He started retreating inside the lighthouse. Despite Gruner repeatedly telling him, he just sat quietly in a corner and soon David fainted. Gruner continued fighting those creatures alone. The next morning, Gruner angrily woke him up and said, "If you want to stay in the lighthouse, you will have to obey everything I say. Fetch water daily, do all the small and big tasks of the lighthouse, and also do guard duty with him at night." Whether David wanted to or not, doing all this became a necessity for him. To stay alive, he had to stay in the lighthouse. David was now ready to do all of Gruner's tasks, but there was one thing he never liked: torturing that female creature physically in different ways every day. But a person who has been living alone on this deserted island for years is bound to have a disturbed mental state. David thinks something similar. Maybe Gruner's mind is not right anymore, but still, he has to obey him. Night falls, and both get ready for guard duty again, and once more, those creatures emerge from the sea. But today, David is not afraid. He fired, but today Gruner does nothing. He leaves David outside, closes the lighthouse gate, and sits quietly inside so that David can learn on his own how to fight these creatures. Otherwise, he will die fighting. David screams for help, but Gruner does not help him. Fighting like this, the night passes and morning comes. In the morning, Gruner saw David sitting outside the lighthouse gate, covered in blood. Now he had learned how to fight these creatures. The fear inside him was gone. Time passed like this, fighting those creatures at night and handling Gruner's lighthouse work during the day. This island now felt like a closed home to him. He kept thinking all the time about when he would leave this place, when he would be free. Over time, David developed a strange friendship with that female creature. David started feeling bad for her. Now he understood how difficult it is to live alone after leaving one's people. Perhaps that creature felt something similar. David even gave that creature a name, Aneris. And then one day, they noticed that the attacks from those creatures were gradually decreasing. David thinks maybe they go somewhere else in the winter, like whales do. Or perhaps they realized, fighting with these two will not achieve anything. But Gruner clearly told him, absolutely not. They will attack again. Now they are reproducing themselves. Their numbers are increasing. A few more days passed like this. One night after dinner, Gruner and David started playing chess to pass the time. But here, Gruner made a big mistake. They both got so engrossed in the game that they forgot to turn on the lighthouse lights, and taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures attacked them. David saw that the creatures had now bred. Their numbers were so high that even two people couldn't fight for long. The bullets for the guns were almost finished. Somehow, they managed to reach the top of the lighthouse. But, in the meantime, Gruner got a deep injury on his leg. Meanwhile, the creatures were trying to enter the lighthouse and David couldn't see any way for Gruner to escape. They gave up. But fortunately, it was morning. As soon as the sun slowly rises, those creatures leave the lighthouse and return to the sea. Aneris tries to heal Gruner's wound, but by now, David had understood that with these creatures, they cannot win this fight. The bullets are also nearly finished. They don't have enough food to last much longer. The next day, fortunately, when David was wandering outside the lighthouse, he saw a ship in the sea. He quickly went inside to get a flare gun and went to signal the ship. But Gruner stopped him because he didn't want David to leave. At that moment, Aneris attacked Gruner. She wanted to save David from Gruner. Gruner does not want anyone to leave this island. This island is his own world, where he lives like a king. There is a servant who obeys his every command. He does not want to leave this life and return to the city. And he does not want to let David go either. After being alone for so long, he finally had someone he could talk to. Slowly, the ship disappeared into the sea before David's eyes. Now, he had nothing to do. A few more days passed like this. Gruner was still treating both David and Aneris badly, but he especially beat Aneris, which David did not like at all. One day, David gave Aneris a small toy boat as a gift, which he had made from whale bones. Maybe this would lighten Aneris's mood a bit, but when Aneris saw that boat, she took David to a corner of the island where there was actually a real boat. When David asked Gruner about that boat, he said yes, he already knew that there was a boat in that part of the island. A few months ago, an armed smuggling ship carrying a lot of ammunition sank near this island due to a storm at sea. Some people managed to reach this island alive through a boat. But before morning, none of them survived. They all fell prey to that creature. Hearing all this, a plan came to David's mind. They had something like a diving suit. If one of them wore that suit and dived into that part of the sea, they might find some bullets or dynamite, which would make it easier to fight those monsters. But Gruner directly refused. He didn't even want to go near that sea. But David, despite the danger to his life, was ready to do this work. In this way, a few more days passed. A deep connection began to form between David and Anarias. David had started to like her. Gruner secretly noticed this, and for the first time, the thought occurred to him that maybe he should help David. But Gruner's real intention was something else. He wanted David to bring the boxes of dynamite from under the sea back to the surface with his help and then leave him alone in the sea so that the creatures would kill him. This way, he would get the dynamite and Anarias would become his slave again. Both of them reached the place. David put on the diving suit and went underwater. The ship was completely destroyed. But luck was good. They found some boxes of dynamite. Then suddenly, those creatures appeared in front. David panicked and fell. The iron diving suit was so heavy that he couldn't even move. He couldn't send a signal up to Gruner. Gruner thought that maybe those creatures had already killed David. But in reality, there were only 2 small children there. David swam underwater to the precious starfish himself. They found some old boxes there, which contained dynamite. They laid dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse, so that when the next attack happens, they can eliminate the monsters in one go. A few months passed and snow began to fall, but once again, those creatures disappeared. The attacks had stopped. Now their main job was to operate the lighthouse and keep watch as always. Gruner's patience had run out. Perhaps Anarias had told those monsters about the dynamite plan, which is why they weren't attacking now. Gruner went mad with anger and started beating Anarias, but David stopped him. In the end, they both came up with a new plan, to leave the main gate of the lighthouse open so that as soon as the creatures came close, they could be blown up with dynamite. In just a short while, those creatures started emerging from the sea. They headed straight for the main gate and attacked David as soon as they entered. David also shows courage and confronts those monsters. As soon as the creatures reach the lighthouse, Gruner presses the dynamite lever, but the blast doesn't happen because Davi had already disconnected it and forgot to reconnect it. He immediately runs up and starts connecting the dynamite wire. By then, the creatures are trying to climb the lighthouse, and only Gruner is trying to stop them alone. As soon as the connection is complete, David detonates the first layer. Many creatures are destroyed in the blast, but there are still many monsters ready to attack the lighthouse. Because of this, Gruner detonates the second layer as well. Both are knocked unconscious in this terrible explosion. The next morning, when they regain consciousness, Anarias was not there. Dead creatures were scattered all around. Gruner was killing all those who were alive but injured. Then David's eyes fall on a necklace hanging around the neck of one of them, and at that moment, David realizes his biggest mistake. The creatures he had considered violent until now were also civilized like humans. They just couldn't speak. Maybe their attack on the lighthouse was for some reason. But for Gruner, all this was nonsense. For him, he was the king of this island, and everyone had to obey his orders. After that day, the creatures could never attack in the same way again. But every day, a crying voice would come from the seaside. David still didn't know how much damage they had done. How many families were broken, how many children lost their people, just because of a misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some small children of those creatures in the sea. All of them had lost their families. David made a round circle of stones and placed a small toy boat in the middle so that Anarias would return. But no matter how long he waited, Anarias never returned. One morning, David saw Gruner lying unconscious. There were some old things placed around him. Among them was an old photograph, and as soon as David saw that photograph, he was astonished. It was the girl whose photo he had seen in Gruner's diary on the first day. She was none other than his wife. Gruner had a wife, and he was the weather officer of this lighthouse, who had come to this island about a year ago. His real name was Robert, but he had changed his name because he never wanted to leave this island. Seeing all this, David also gave up hope that he would ever be able to leave this island. The next evening, when David went to the seashore, he saw that the small boat placed in the circle was no longer there, but in its place, he saw a small creature's baby. in whose hands the boat was. David threw his torch into the middle of the circle to show that he did not intend to fight. He doesn't want to hurt anyone, he wants to befriend them. Shortly after, Anarias emerges from the sea waves, and behind her, the entire group of creatures also surfaces from the sea. But this time, no one attacks David because they also want peace now. Their intention was only to find a safe place for their children, which every animal does. They did not like the sudden entry of humans on this island at all. That's why they attacked every night. But who will explain this to Gruner? He still considers himself the king of this island. Gruner comes out of the lighthouse with a gun in hand. David tries to explain to him, these creatures do not want to fight. They want peace. But Gruner doesn't listen to anyone. He insists on Inarius, but this was the first time Inarius didn't obey him because she was no longer his servant. Now she was just a mother standing up for her children. Gruner starts feeling weak inside because now no one was obeying his orders. In anger, he stepped towards the lighthouse. David felt that perhaps Gruner had now understood that every creature desires freedom. No one wants to live as someone else's slave. But Gruner was not a wise person. As soon as he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from the signal gun, which directly hit a small creature's child. That child died immediately. All the creatures ran away in fear, and so did Anarius. He completely lost his trust in David. Mad with anger, David immediately runs towards the lighthouse and bumps into Gruner. He starts fighting with him. Why did you do all this? These people just wanted peace. But Gruner had become so violent that he decided to kill David. As he was about to strike David with an axe in his hand, David called him by his real name, Robert. Hearing this, Gruner stopped immediately. In reality, Robert was never such a person. After coming to this island, his mental state had almost broken. Loneliness, his wife's death, and deep depression had made him like this. He wasn't actually a killer. He was a good person. The creatures never wanted to fight, and they just wanted peace. Gruner killed them only to appear powerful. And now Gruner realized his mistake. So he surrendered himself to those creatures, and within moments, they killed him. David locks himself inside the lighthouse. Time passed like this, and a year later, a government officer arrives on the island. Along with him is a new weather officer. David was taken away from there, and now the new government officer started monitoring the weather on this island. But the officer thought that David was Gruner, and David did not correct their misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there without saying anything, because now he also did not want to leave this island, just like Gruner. Meanwhile, Anarias was happy with her family. They no longer feared a man like Gruner. Now they could live freely on the island and in the sea. And with this scene, the movie ends here. So friends, let us know in the comments how you liked this movie. If you liked the video, please like and share it and subscribe to our channel.